We call him a mastermind, a strategic genius who played the world like a game of chess. But if you look at the evidence, that's not what you see at all. Of course, not tragic in the way the show usually earns, and not cool in the way it's sometimes framed online, but genuinely unsettling in a way that's hard to name until you start pulling on the psychology underneath it. Because I saw that and immediately thought back to the little Eren who was arrogant and reckless and had this almost sacred dream of going past the walls. And now, here he is, halfway there, staring at himself like he's watching a stranger perform his life. So, what happened to him? He watched his mother get eaten alive, watched his friends die in ways no one should ever have to witness, inherited the memories of people who hadn't been born yet, and at the end of all of it, killed 80% of humanity, including effectively himself. But there's one thing that nobody really unpacks. He didn't do it out of hatred. He didn't snap. And he wasn't playing some genius lone game that he had perfectly calculated from the beginning. He did it because his brain broke in a very specific, very real, very documentable way. And once you see it, you can't unsee it because you'll watch the whole series again and realize it was happening in slow motion the entire time, long before the rumbling ever started. So, the real question isn't why Eren destroyed the world. The real question is, at what point did he lose the ability to stop himself? To understand what broke Eren, you have to understand what was loaded into him first. Because if you think that this is a story about someone who chose violence, you missed all of it. This is a story about someone who had choice itself taken away from him, piece by piece, before he ever realized it was happening. When Eren ate his father and inherited the Attack Titan, he sure gained power, but also the memories from the future. Well, more like conclusion. Moments that hadn't happened yet, bleeding backwards into his mind with the full emotional weight of things that had already occurred, already locked in, already decided without his consent. Do you really understand what that actually does to a person? Like, you're a teenager already living inside a walled prison, already carrying a grief and rage most adults never touch in lifetime, and on top of all that, your brain starts filling up with endings you can't change. Not possibilities you can work around, but outcomes that have already been sealed. Can you imagine what that does to your ability to choose? Because this is where the mystery gets genuinely disturbing. Eren, of all people, should never have chosen the rumbling. This is the boy who cried at the ocean because the sight of something boundless moved him so deeply that he couldn't hold it together. Freedom wasn't a concept to him. It was something almost like a rare treasure. And yet, he became the very thing he spent his entire life hating. The boy who wept at open water, choosing to take everything from everyone else. The answer to why lives in a scene most people blow past. In the past, that strange dimension where the founding titan connects all Eldians. Eren sits across from Armin and says something that should stop every river cold. He doesn't know why he did it. That's a genuine admission that he cannot explain his own actions. Not a villain line. I see it as a psychological symptom. His brain was never given a single moment of relief. Every decision he made already had an outcome attached to it, and he wasn't operating as someone making choices. He was reacting over and over to a future he could see but couldn't escape and couldn't change. So, what actually happens to a mind living under that kind of permanent, inescapable pressure? That's exactly what we need to talk about. Do you know what actually happens to a brain under permanent, unsolvable pressure? It stops seeing options. Seeing because it's not like they disappear out of nowhere. No, but the brain cannot process it in the same way anymore. The mind, when it's overwhelmed past a certain threshold, does something almost mechanical where it narrows down, locks onto the single most available exit, and fixates there completely, to the exclusion of everything else. Psychologists call this cognitive tunneling, and you'll see it written all over Eren's behavior in the back half of the series. Watch the moment his future memories fully settle in. Watch that happen right after that scene where he kisses Historia's hand and look at his face. Because the Eren from the early seasons, loud, emotional, almost reckless in how openly he felt things start to disappear. And what replaces him isn't strategic mastermind. It's someone cold and detached who looks at the people who love him as if he is watching them from behind a glass. There's a scene that makes this impossible to ignore where Eren is sitting with Historia, holding her hand, the hand of someone who genuinely cares about him, and he just stares through her, not at her, onto something only he can see. His body present in that room while Eren Yeager himself has already left. What you're seeing there is the cognitive tunneling we are talking about. When the threat a mind is facing feels total and unsolvable, the brain stops generating creative solutions and commits so completely to the one path it can still see that everything else gets filtered out. Genuinely unseen, not even registered as real anymore. So the rumbling was a fixation. The only option his tunneled mind was still capable of seeing, every other path already invisible to him, because every alternative, diplomacy, sacrifice, negotiation, even just stopping required mental bandwidth he no longer had. And processing a second option means holding two futures in your head at once, but his head was already full. You can track the moment it fully closes if you go back and watch. The Eren who used to push back, who fought even his own allies when he thought they were wrong, just goes quiet, stops questioning, stops feeling things out loud, because questioning requires uncertainty, and uncertainty requires the belief that another answer might exist, and the tunnel had already closed that off. He was becoming colder because he really sitting with the weight of other people, letting their reality land on him, would have forced the tunnel open, and his mind had already decided it couldn't survive that. But the thing is, the tunnel didn't just take his choices away from it, it took him, the actual person, and the Marley arc is where you can see exactly what was left behind. Eren infiltrates Marley alone, with no backup, no explanation, no real plan beyond getting closer to the enemy. And for months, he just sits there inside the enemy territory surrounded by people who would kill him on sight, eating with them, laughing at their jokes, listening to their stories. And when Hanji finally finds him, they barely recognize him. And when Mikasa looks at him, something in her face breaks a little because the person looking back at her isn't quite the person she grew up with. There's a dinner scene in Marley that's easy to scroll past where Eren is sitting at the table with Marleyan soldiers, and who represent everything the walls were built to protect against. And they say something funny and he laughs. But it's not a bitter laugh. It's not even a performance he is struggling to maintain. It's just a hollow, completely empty, a man running on autopilot while the person inside has long since checked out. And that laugh is one of the loneliest moments in the entire series, even though it barely registers as a scene. Then there's the basement conversation with Reiner, and this one matters. Because Eren finds the man who helped destroy his hometown, the man whose betrayal broke something inside him as a kid. And instead of rage or volcanic anger that defined him for years, Eren just looks at him and says they are the same. And people read that as philosophical or strategic, or maybe even forgiving. But it's none of those things. It's a man who has lost the ability to see himself as a separate from the people he's supposed to boast. Because when you're tunneled that deep, the distinctions that used to define you stop feeling real, and the tunnel flattens all of it. The rumbling. When it finally comes, it isn't born from hatred. Eren doesn't start it because he hates the world outside the walls. He starts it because there is simply nothing left inside him that could have stopped it. The decision had already been made somewhere in the back of his broken mind long before he ever stood on that wall and watched the titans begin to move. And by the time it happens, Eren isn't really there to witness it. But then Armin reaches him. And in the past, after everything is already in motion, Eren says something that should devastate you if you let it land. He didn't want to die. He wanted to keep living, wanted a future, wanted the things that every human being wants when they're being honest with themselves. And he was still in there, somewhere behind the tunnel, and the locked off doors, and the cold, and the silence, and that hollow laugh at Marion's dinner table. There was still a person who wanted something other than this. But the cruelest part of cognitive tunneling is that you don't know you're in it. Eren experienced himself as someone who had looked at every option and found only one that worked. Because from the inside, the tunnel feels like clarity. Like finally seeing the truth that everyone else is too weak or too scared to face. And that feeling, that false devastating certainty, was his actual prison. Freedom was everything to him. The thing that made him weep at the ocean. The thing he said he'd fight for until his last breath. And in the end, his own mind became the one thing he could never break free from. The boy who hated cages spending his final years inside when he couldn't even see. Eren is more than just an anime character. Why? Because this same tunnel is something real people fall into every day. And once you know what you look for, you'll start recognizing it everywhere. When someone is deep and burned out and genuinely cannot see a way out except quitting everything, that's the tunnel. When grief convinces someone the pain will never change, that's the tunnel. When doomscrolling locks you into a loop where the world only seems to get worse and your brain stops generating hope entirely, that's the tunnel. Because the mind under extreme sustained pressure stops being creative, stops seeing sideways, picks a direction and commits completely even when that direction leads to somewhere devastating. And the way out isn't willpower. To be honest, it's interruption. Someone or something that breaks the fixation even briefly and forces the mind to remember other options exist. Armin tried to be there for Eren, and Mikasa tried, but by the time they reached him, the walls had already been standing too long and there was no one left who could get through. So, The question we're sitting with, and this is genuinely for you, not for Eren, is whether you can recognize the tunnel before it closes, because the moment it does, it stops feeling like a tunnel and starts feeling like the truth.